There are moments in life that stop everything. The noise fades, the crowd goes silent, and something so pure fills the air that your chest tightens before you even understand why. This was one of those moments. Not because of a celebrity. Not because of someone with a record deal or years of training. Because of a 12-year-old boy. A blind boy. A poor boy from the Philippines. A child who had already lost so much, who had grown up with struggle as his only constant companion, and who walked onto one of the most intimidating stages on the planet with absolutely nothing but his voice. He grew up in a small home in the Philippines where money was always a source of anxiety. His parents worked endlessly just to keep the family fed. Comfort was a foreign concept. And on top of the weight of poverty, he also carried blindness. From a very young age, the world of colors and faces and shapes was closed to him. But in the darkness, something extraordinary was growing. A voice. Not just a pleasant sound. A voice that carried pain, beauty, and hope all at once. A voice that seemed to come from somewhere far deeper than a 12-year-old body should be able to reach. Music had always been his companion. In a life where so many doors were shut, music stayed open. He sang in his home, in the streets, in church, wherever sound could travel freely. And people would stop walking. They would turn around and stare at this small blind child and feel something they could not name. Because a voice like that, at that age, from that life, is not something the world produces often. When the idea came up that he should audition for America's Got Talent, people around him were nervous. That stage is enormous. The lights are blinding. The audience is massive and unpredictable. And Simon Cowell sits at that judging table like a man who has made a career out of cutting through illusions. Sending a 12-year-old blind boy with no professional training onto that stage seemed almost cruel to some people. What if he froze? What if Simon said something sharp and cutting? But the boy was not afraid. There is a kind of courage that only comes from people who have already survived the hardest things. He had lived with blindness every single day. He had lived with poverty every single day. He had faced the particular loneliness of being different in a world that does not always know how to make room for difference. And he had not broken. He had simply kept singing. So when the opportunity came, he said yes. Without hesitation. With the quiet confidence of someone who knows, deep in his bones, that what he carries inside him is real. When he walked onto that stage, guided carefully to the microphone, the audience saw a small boy. Simply dressed. Standing still. Facing the judges with eyes that told a different story than the rest of the room. There was a moment, just a brief pause, where the entire arena seemed to hold its breath. And then the music started. And then he opened his mouth. The first note landed in that room like something physical. It filled the space from the floor to the ceiling, not just with volume, but with feeling. Pure, unguarded, undeniable feeling. The kind that bypasses every rational part of your brain and goes straight to the part of you that is simply human. The restless, chattering audience went completely silent in an instant. Because what they were hearing was not what they had expected. Not from a 12-year-old. Not from a child with no training. Not from someone who had traveled from a small corner of a distant country with nothing in his hands but faith and song. He sang with everything he had. Not with the careful, measured delivery of a trained performer. He sang the way people cry. He sang the way people pray. Every word came loaded with meaning that a child his age should not technically be able to carry, and yet he carried it effortlessly. Every hard day of his life, every moment of uncertainty, every time he had to find his way in the dark, all of it poured into his voice and became music. The judges watched. And one by one, their polished composure began to slip. Eyes widened. Hands pressed against chests. And then the cameras found Simon Cowell. The man who built a career on being unmovable. Sitting in his chair with real tears running down his face. Not performed emotion. Real tears. The kind that come when something reaches past every defense and touches the part of you that you usually keep carefully guarded. When the last note ended, the arena erupted. 2,000 people on their feet, screaming, crying, releasing everything that had been building inside them. Every judge voted yes. Unanimously. Without hesitation. This boy reminded the world of something simple and necessary. That talent does not grow only in comfortable soil. That the most powerful voices are sometimes shaped in the hardest lives. That a person who has been forced to find light in darkness carries a particular kind of beauty that no amount of training can manufacture. Somewhere in the Philippines, in a small home where life is still difficult, a 12-year-old boy with no sight and an enormous voice learned that everything he carried inside him was worth something. That it was worth everything. And Simon Cowell, one of the most powerful men in the music industry, sat in his chair and wept. Because real talent, when it finally appears, is impossible to resist. It reaches into the chest of a stranger and reminds them of why they are alive. This is what one voice can do. And the world will not forget it.